My name is Brianna, and I'm 29 years old. At a regular family dinner one weekend, my older brother looked straight at me across the table and said, "You have to give me $500,000 to buy a new car." My parents nodded in agreement and added, "That's right. Your brother needs a car to impress girls." The room went quiet for a second. Everyone waited for my reaction, like this was the most normal request in the world. I felt my fists clench under the table, but I didn't say a word. I just pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked upstairs without looking at anyone. A few minutes later, I grabbed my coat, slipped out the front door, and got into my car. The Seattle rain was coming down hard, blurring the windshield as I sat there in the dark. For the first time in years, I smiled coldly. Then I made one phone call. I called the bank and told them to freeze every single supplementary card linked to my account. All of them. Immediately. The next morning, my phone exploded with calls and texts from the entire family. Missed calls stacked up, one after another, notifications lighting up the screen nonstop. They had no idea what was coming. If you've ever been treated like the family ATM, the one everyone counts on until they don't need you anymore, smash that like button and subscribe right now, because you're not going to believe what happened next. That night, as I drove back to my apartment in downtown Seattle, the rain pounding against the windshield matched the storm building inside me. For the first time, I let myself think about how everything had started 5 years earlier and how one small favor had snowballed into something that consumed my life. It began when my older brother Ryan Thompson, then 34, lost his job at a logistics company during a round of layoffs. He came home that day complaining about how unfair it was, how the boss had it out for him, and how he just needed a little time to figure things out. My sister Lauren Thompson, 32 at the time, immediately jumped in to defend him, saying the company was toxic anyway, and that Ryan deserved better. Mom and Dad stayed quiet at first, but I could see the worry on their faces. I was the youngest, fresh out of college with my first real job in tech, and I felt bad for him. So when Ryan mentioned he was short on rent that month, I sent him a couple $1,000s. Just to help temporarily, I told myself. That temporary help became a pattern faster than I expected. Ryan didn't rush to find another job. Instead, he spent more time at home gaming or hanging out with friends, spending money on new gadgets and nights out. When the next bill came due and he asked again, Lauren texted me separately saying it would mean the world to the family if I could cover it one more time. I did, because saying no felt like letting everyone down. Soon those requests weren't just for rent. He needed cash for a new phone, then car repairs, then something for his resume workshop that never seemed to happen. Each time I sent money, Ryan acted like it was no big deal, barely thanking me before moving on to the next thing. Mom and Dad started leaning in too. Dad mentioned his back was acting up, making it hard to go back to work after early retirement, and suddenly I was covering part of the mortgage to ease the pressure. Mom talked about how stressed she was keeping the house running, so I picked up the utility bills and groceries without anyone directly asking. Lauren kept framing it as family pulling together, reminding me how lucky I was with my salary, while Ryan was going through a rough patch. Before long, the temporary fixes turned permanent. I added supplementary cards to my account for them, thinking it would make things easier. At first, it was just for emergencies. But the charges piled up, groceries turning into restaurant deliveries, utilities, including premium cable packages, even Ryan's streaming services, and occasional shopping sprees. The mortgage supplement grew from a few hundred to covering half the payment every month. Car insurance for both parents' vehicles and Ryan's old truck landed on my statements too. Monthly expenses like phone plans and random subscriptions followed. Every new charge came with a new excuse. Dad's doctor visits, Mom's need for a break, Ryan almost landing an interview that required new clothes. No one ever asked how I was doing with the extra load. They assumed my job paid enough to handle it, and I kept quiet because confronting it meant risking fights or being called ungrateful after everything our parents had done raising us. Lauren would send messages praising how responsible I was, which somehow made it harder to stop. Ryan treated the money like it was expected, not a gift. By the time that dinner rolled around, I had been carrying them financially for 5 full years without a single break. The realization hit me hard as I sat in the car that night. I wasn't their daughter or little sister anymore. I was just the reliable source of funds that kept everything afloat. That cold clarity was exactly what pushed me to pick up the phone and tell the bank to freeze every supplementary card right then and there. The next few days were nonstop. Right from the first morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications, and the initial wave of messages was nothing but pure shock and confusion. Dad called early while I was making coffee, leaving 2 quick voicemails asking why his card got declined at the gas station and whether the bank had flagged something suspicious. Mom sent a flurry of texts shortly after, wondering out loud if hackers had gotten into my account and urging me to contact customer service before things got worse. Ryan shot over a short message complaining that his usual breakfast run had been rejected at the register, followed by a simple, "Can you sort this out?" Lauren chimed in with a longer voice note. Her voice edged with real worry as she described standing at the supermarket checkout with a full cart, only to have every card turned down while people waited behind her. They all sounded genuinely baffled, repeating versions of "this has never happened before," and assuming it had to be some technical error on the bank's end rather than anything I'd done deliberately. I opened each message as it arrived, listening to the rising frustration in their voices, yet I kept my responses locked at 0. As that first day bled into the second and third, the approach changed into something heavier and more calculated. Mom left a tearful voicemail walking me through all the years she and Dad had gone without, so they could provide for us kids, painting pictures of skipped vacations and second jobs just to keep the family afloat. Dad phoned later with that low, measured tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, reminding me that blood family sticks together through thick and thin, and that walking away over money wasn't how we were raised. Lauren flooded my inbox with long paragraphs about how Ryan had barely eaten since the dinner, how he was pacing the house unable to focus, and how my decision was pushing him closer to a breaking point nobody wanted to see. The messages layered on stories of birthdays they'd stretched, budgets for Christmases where presents still appeared under the tree, and quiet implications that all those sacrifices deserved loyalty in return. Each one carried the weight of old obligations designed to pull at whatever guilt still lingered inside me. Then, toward the end of that week, the frustration boiled over into direct blame that felt sharper than anything before. Ryan left a heated voice note labeling me selfish and dramatic for shutting everything down without even a conversation, claiming I'd always looked down on the rest of them because my paycheck came from a fancy tech job. Lauren backed him up with texts suggesting I'd let new friends or coworkers convince me the family was toxic, turning me against the people who'd known me longest. Dad followed with a message saying I was punishing everyone for one tense evening, while Mom wrote that my continued silence was tearing the house apart and making daily life unbearable. The words grew harsher, heartless, ungrateful, changed, as if I'd become the sole cause of every problem they now faced. I read it all. Every text, every voicemail, every missed call notification pulled my attention the moment it appeared, even when I was in meetings or trying to unwind at night. Some lines hit hard enough to make my stomach twist with leftover guilt. Others sparked a quiet anger I hadn't fully felt before. But no matter how intense the barrage became, I never typed a single reply. I didn't pick up the phone, didn't send even an emoji, didn't acknowledge receipt in any way. That complete silence, uncomfortable as it was, at first turned into the clearest boundary I'd ever set. It marked the first time I refused to step in and fix things for them, and with every hour that passed without my intervention, I felt a small but growing space open up inside me. About 10 days later, I finally agreed to come over for dinner. The drive to my parents' house in the Seattle suburbs that evening carried a weight I hadn't felt on previous visits, with the overcast sky and damp roads mirroring the tension building inside me. I had convinced myself that showing up would allow them to speak their minds, perhaps even offer an apology. But I also knew I needed to deliver my own message in person rather than through texts or calls. As I parked in the driveway, the warm glow from the windows suggested an ordinary family night. Yet the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Mom greeted me at the door with an overly enthusiastic hug that lingered a bit too long, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Dad hovered nearby, offering a nod and a brief pat on the shoulder while Ryan slouched on the couch, scrolling his phone, and Lauren arranged plates in the dining room. The aroma of Mom's signature pot roast wafted through the house, a deliberate choice for comfort on what she probably hoped would be a reconciliation meal. We moved to the table soon after I arrived, passing dishes in near silence, broken only by forced comments about traffic and recent rain. Conversation stayed light through the first few bites, everyone careful to avoid the obvious, until Ryan couldn't hold back anymore. He placed his utensils down deliberately and fixed his gaze on me, launching into a detailed account of how the sudden cutoff had disrupted his routine completely. He described days spent unable to leave the house for simple errands, missed opportunities to meet potential employers, and a growing sense of isolation that he blamed directly on the lack of reliable transportation. A new car, he argued passionately, would solve it all, giving him the freedom to attend interviews farther away, present himself professionally, and rebuild confidence that had taken hits over the years. His tone mixed frustration with self-pity, making it clear he saw himself as the primary victim in the situation. Lauren picked up seamlessly where he left off, shifting the spotlight to my behavior with pointed precision. She labeled my response to the original dinner as an extreme overreaction, accusing me of letting one offhand remark escalate into something that punished the whole household. She questioned whether my success at work had made me distant and overly sensitive, implying that city life and higher income had eroded my understanding of family struggles. Her words carried layers of resentment, painting me as the one who had abandoned loyalty when it mattered most. Mom's composure cracked, next her voice trembling as tears began to form, while she spoke of sleepless nights worrying about overdue notices and the strain on everyone. Dad joined in with measured calm, appealing to reason by outlining a short-term plan, just enough support to cover basics for a couple more months until Ryan secured employment and stability returned. He emphasized unity and patience, suggesting this small extension would prevent bigger problems down the line. I absorbed it all without interrupting, noting how their arguments wove together seamlessly, each reinforcing the others in a familiar pattern designed to erode resistance. The room grew quieter as they finished, all eyes turning expectantly toward me. When the moment arrived, I spoke evenly and directly, avoiding long justifications or raised tones. I made it clear that from this point forward I would not cover any expenses, cards, or bills of any kind. Shock rippled across their faces in waves. Ryan froze mid-sentence as if words failed him. Lauren's expression hardened into disbelief. Mom dabbed at fresh tears with her napkin, and Dad exhaled slowly while staring at the table. No immediate outburst followed, just a heavy stillness that underscored how unexpected my firmness was. I rose from my chair, removed the spare key to their house from my ring, and placed it gently but deliberately on the tablecloth. Without further comment or backward glance, I walked out the door into the evening chill, got into my car, and left the property behind. The decision felt final in that moment, with no room for second thoughts or retreat. While all this was going on, Nathan's family became my escape. Nathan and I had been together for nearly 2 years by then, long enough that I'd met his parents and his sister Claire several times, but the chaos with my own family pushed me closer to them in ways I hadn't expected. My boyfriend Nathan Harris lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, and his home always felt like a completely different world from the one I'd grown up in. Where my parents' house carried an undercurrent of unspoken expectations and tension, Nathan's carried warmth that didn't come with conditions. The first real shift happened one evening when I showed up unannounced after a particularly rough day of ignoring messages. Nathan's mom opened the door, took one look at my face, and simply pulled me into a hug without asking questions. She led me to the kitchen where Nathan's dad was finishing dinner preparations, and instead of probing about what was wrong, he handed me a glass of wine and asked how my latest project at work was going. They listened as I talked about deadlines and team dynamics, genuinely interested in the details of my day, rather than steering the conversation toward any needs of their own. That simple act of asking about my life, really asking and caring about the answer, stood in stark contrast to the silence I'd grown used to from my own parents whenever I tried to share anything beyond finances. Claire arrived a little later, dropping by with takeout desserts because she'd had a craving. Nathan's sister was easygoing and quick to laugh, and soon the four of us were sitting around the table trading stories about everything from bad movies to favorite hiking spots around Seattle. No one mentioned money, no one hinted at favors, and no one measured my worth by what I could provide. They included me naturally passing plates and refilling glasses as if I'd always belonged there. When I admitted I was exhausted from long hours, Nathan's mom responded by saying she admired how hard I pushed myself and suggested I take the weekend off to recharge. The comment landed softly but powerfully, acknowledging my effort without turning it into an obligation for anyone else. Over the following weeks, those visits became more frequent. Some nights, Nathan and I would cook with his parents, experimenting with recipes, while his dad shared tips from years of weekend barbecues. Other times, Claire would text inviting us to game nights where the competition stayed lighthearted and the teasing never crossed into judgment. They asked about my interests outside workbooks. I was reading music. I liked places I wanted to travel, and followed up on those details later, remembering small things I'd mentioned in passing. Nathan's dad once surprised me by bringing up an article about a tech conference I'd talked about attending, asking thoughtful questions that showed he'd actually looked it up. These moments built quietly, creating a space where I could relax without bracing for the next request or criticism. The difference hit me hardest during ordinary routines. At my parents' table, conversations often circled back to shortages or plans that required my input financially. At Nathan's, discussions flowed freely about dreams, funny memories, or current events, with everyone contributing equally. When stress from work spilled over, Nathan's family offered support through presence and encouragement rather than leveraging it for their own gain. They celebrated small wins with me, like a successful presentation or a promotion discussion, without tying those achievements to what they might mean for the household budget. Being around them provided breathing room I desperately needed. The constant contrast sharpened my perspective on what healthy connection could feel like: mutual respect, genuine curiosity about each other's lives, and inclusion that didn't demand sacrifice as proof of love. Those evenings and weekends gradually rebuilt a sense of normalcy for me, reminding me that relationships didn't have to feel transactional. The peace I found there strengthened my resolve about the boundaries I'd set elsewhere, making it clearer than ever that I deserved spaces where I was valued for who I was, not what I could pay for. 2 months passed with almost complete silence from my family. The quiet felt strange at first, like waiting for a storm that never arrived, but it gradually settled into something closer to relief. Life moved forward in steady rhythms, work projects wrapping up successfully, weekends with Nathan and his family filling the calendar, evenings where my phone stayed dark, except for messages from friends or colleagues. I allowed myself to believe the distance might hold, that my boundary had finally registered. Then one rainy Thursday evening, everything shifted again. Nathan and I were unwinding on the couch when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar local number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was Mom, her voice tight and breathless as she explained that Ryan had been in an accident earlier that afternoon. She rushed through details. He'd been driving his old truck on slick roads, the brakes gave out completely on a downhill stretch, and he'd clipped a guardrail trying to stop. No one was seriously hurt, just some bruises and a totaled vehicle, but the tow bill and repair estimates were already piling up. The way she framed it made the incident sound unavoidable, a stroke of bad luck that required immediate help. By the next morning, the full picture emerged through a group text from Lauren. Ryan's truck wasn't salvageable, and the insurance payout would barely cover the towing and minor medical checks. Without reliable transportation, he couldn't pursue the job leads he'd supposedly lined up, and the family was scrambling to figure out daily logistics like grocery runs or appointments. The messages carried an urgent tone, emphasizing how one misfortune had snowballed into a crisis nobody could manage alone. They revived the original argument from that fateful dinner: a new car would prevent future risks and give Ryan the fresh start he needed to get back on track. The pressure built quickly over the following days. Lauren sent photos of the damaged truck and quotes from mechanics showing costs far beyond what anyone at home could cover. Mom followed with updates about Dad's increased stress affecting his blood pressure, hinting that the situation was taking a physical toll. Ryan himself stayed mostly quiet in the chat, letting others carry the narrative, but one evening he called directly. His voice sounded shaken as he described the moment the brakes failed, how close it had come to something worse, and how losing the truck felt like losing his last bit of independence. The conversation circled back to the same plea: if I could just help with a down payment or loan for a replacement vehicle, everything would stabilize again. Late the next week, the knock at my apartment door came well after 9 on a weekday night. I checked the peephole and saw Dad standing in the hallway, jacket damp from the persistent Seattle drizzle, looking older and more worn than I remembered. He didn't wait for an invitation. Once I opened the door, he stepped inside, glanced around briefly, and launched straight into the reason for his visit. The accident had exposed how precarious things had become without the financial cushion they'd relied on, he said. Ryan was distraught and struggling to move forward. Mom wasn't sleeping, and the household bills were stacking higher each day. Dad spoke of his ongoing back issues flaring up under the strain of promising leads Ryan finally had for work that required dependable transport, and of how a modest investment now could turn everything around. He promised repayment schedules, interest if I wanted anything to make it formal and fair. Listening to him repeat the familiar pattern: health concerns, imminent change for Ryan, assurances of future independence, crystallized something I'd only half acknowledged before. Nothing fundamental had shifted in their approach. The crisis had simply provided new urgency to the same requests. The accident, unfortunate as it was, stemmed directly from years of deferred maintenance they'd expected me to fund indefinitely. Dad's presence in my living room that night, unannounced, and assuming access, drove home how little my earlier boundary had been respected. When he finished laying out the plan, the room hung heavy with expectation. I met his eyes steadily and spoke without raising my voice or prolonging the explanation. I told him plainly that I would not contribute anything toward a new car, repairs, or any other expenses. For the first time, the words came out raw and direct. I'd been taken advantage of for long enough, and that ended now. Dad stared for a long moment, disbelief giving way to quiet frustration as the reality settled. He didn't argue loudly or storm out, just gathered his jacket, muttered something about hoping I'd reconsider for Mom's sake, and left. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the apartment silent except for the faint sound of rain against the windows. In that stillness, the finality of my refusal felt absolute, with no lingering doubt about whether I'd done the right thing. I told him no, and this time I meant it forever. Dad left without another word that night, the door closing softly behind him as he disappeared into the hallway. I stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and quiet certainty wash over me. There was no yelling, no dramatic scene, just the weight of finality settling in the air. I didn't call after him or offer any explanations to soften the blow. For the first time in years, I simply stood firm, knowing that any small opening would invite the same patterns to creep back in. The days immediately after brought no frantic follow-ups or emotional outbursts, just an eerie absence of contact that confirmed my refusal had truly registered. A couple of weeks passed before signs of change started surfacing indirectly. I noticed a new GoFundMe link appearing in my feed through a distant cousin's share. The page was set up under Mom's name, featuring a familiar photo of the family house against a sunny backyard backdrop. The description spoke of sudden hardships piling up unexpectedly, medical expenses, the recent vehicle loss, and the struggle to maintain stability during a difficult stretch. It asked for help covering essentials and getting back on solid ground, with a goal large enough to address overdue mortgage payments and replace the truck. Updates came sporadically, mostly short notes thanking contributors for their generosity. Donations arrived in small amounts from old neighbors, former coworkers of Dad's, and a few relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. The progress bar moved slowly, hovering well below halfway, even after a month, and eventually the activity dried up altogether. The campaign faded without fanfare, unable to bridge the gap it had hoped to close. As the season shifted into warmer months, more serious notices began arriving at the house. Mom forwarded a scanned copy of one in an email that arrived without comment, just the attachment and a subject line reading, "Important." It was the bank's final warning about missed mortgage payments that had accumulated steadily, outlining a timeline for foreclosure if the outstanding balance wasn't brought current. The letter listed exact figures and deadlines in stark terms, referencing months of partial payments and failed attempts to negotiate extensions. Dad's pending disability claim remained unresolved, dragging through bureaucracy with no immediate payout in sight. Household costs continued mounting, utilities, property taxes, basic maintenance, all landing squarely on limited resources now that the previous cushion had vanished completely. Ryan faced the reality in the most direct way. Warehouse positions at the nearby Amazon fulfillment center offered quick hiring and reliable shifts, so he applied and started soon after. The job demanded long hours on concrete floors, scanning and moving inventory to meet daily targets in a vast climate-controlled building on the edge of the city. Early mornings or overnight schedules became routine, leaving him physically drained by the end of each week. Paychecks covered necessities and chipped at debts, but there was little left for anything beyond survival. He adapted out of necessity, trading late nights out for early bedtimes and rest days spent recovering rather than relaxing. Lauren reached her own turning point around the same period. Contributing her share of expenses on part-time wages grew unsustainable, especially with rising costs everywhere else. She decided to pack her things and move in with her boyfriend, who had a steady job and an apartment downtown that cut commuting time significantly. The arrangement lowered pressure on the family home's budget and gave her more financial breathing room. Weekend visits still happened for laundry or family meals, but the house felt noticeably quieter, with one less daily presence routines shifting to accommodate the change. I contributed nothing during any of this. No emergency transfers appeared in my banking app. No cards were reactivated. No checks written for shortfalls. The consequences played out on their own, shaped by choices made long before, and the sudden lack of ongoing support. Watching the developments from afar brought no sense of triumph or vindication, only a neutral acknowledgement that life adjusts when old patterns break. The house remained standing for now, but the threat loomed larger each month, forcing adjustments nobody had prepared for earlier. By spring, the silence from my old family was permanent. I took the final steps soon after the bank letters started arriving, blocking every number associated with Mom, Dad, Ryan, and Lauren, then deleting entire conversation threads that dated back years. The action felt deliberate and irreversible, clearing space on my phone and in my mind at the same time. No more unexpected notifications pulling me into old patterns, no more scanning for the next crisis. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't known I was missing. Life with Nathan settled into rhythms that felt solid and uncomplicated. We cooked together most evenings, trying new recipes or falling back on favorites while music played in the background. Weekends often meant hiking trails around Seattle, winding paths through evergreen forests, or along Puget Sound viewpoints where the air carried salt and pine. Nathan's parents invited us over regularly, treating me like I'd always been part of their circle. His mom shared family stories during dinner, asking my opinion on everything from garden plans to vacation ideas. His dad included me in conversations about projects or current events, listening as carefully to my thoughts as he did to anyone else's. Claire dropped by frequently, turning ordinary afternoons into laughter-filled catch-ups over coffee or board games. They celebrated milestones with me, a work promotion, a successful presentation, without ever linking those achievements to expectations of return favors. The contrast grew clearer with time. Where my old family had measured connection in contributions, Nathan's measured it in presence and mutual care. Invitations came because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something fixed or funded. Gifts appeared on birthdays or holidays chosen for personal meaning rather than financial relief. Conversations flowed freely about dreams and daily joys, never circling back to shortages or sacrifices. Being around them reinforced a sense of belonging that didn't require constant proof. Professionally, things moved forward, too. The stability at home translated into sharper focus at work, leading to recognition from managers and new responsibilities that excited me. A raise followed, then discussions about leadership tracks I'd once put on hold while managing everyone else's emergencies. The extra income stayed mine, funding small trips with Nathan or savings goals we set together. For the first time, financial decisions felt like choices rather than obligations. Looking back occasionally, I felt no urge to reconnect or check for updates. Ryan's warehouse shifts had become routine, demanding but steady enough to cover his share of bills. Lauren's move had lightened the household load, though visits grew less frequent as her own life expanded. The house remained under threat of foreclosure, with payments still lagging, but those realities no longer pulled at me. They were consequences of choices made long ago, unfolding without my involvement. The permanent break brought a lightness I hadn't anticipated. Days carried less weight, sleep came easier, and laughter with Nathan and his family felt genuine rather than forced. I realized how much energy I'd spent anticipating the next request, how exhausting it had been to hold everything together alone. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for protecting your own well-being. Real family connection doesn't demand endless one-sided sacrifice. It thrives on mutual respect and care. You deserve relationships where you're valued for who you are, not what you can provide. Cutting ties with people who only see you as a resource can be painful, but it's often the healthiest and most empowering decision you'll ever make for yourself. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this entire story. It means a lot that you listened all the way to the end. If any part resonated with you or sparked thoughts about your own experiences, please share in the comments below. I read every one. And if this helped even a little, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this.